Qedushta, one of the most important genres that you'll need to know when understanding Piyyut. You may never have heard the word before, but if you open up an Ashkenazic machzor for any holiday, other than Shemini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, in contemporary printings, or less likely, you open up an Italian Nusach B'nei Romi machzor for Yom Kippur, you will encounter Qedushtaot. What are Qedushtaot? So first of all, a Qedushta is a subgenre of a larger Paitanic genre known as Krova, Kerova. A Krova adorns the brachos of the Amida, specifically of Chazar Sashatz, of the Chazan's out loud repetition of the Amida. In the past, it would have replaced much of the text of several of the brachos. Today, it's, for the most part, inserted into the text. But the important thing is the Krova adorns the text of the Amida. This is different from the Yotzer, which adorns the text of the brachos surrounding Kriyas Shema, beginning Yotzer or, hence Yotzer, or the Mariv, also adorning the brachos of Kriyas Shema for the evening, beginning Hamariv Haravim. The Krova, as we said, is not for any of those brachos of Kriyas Shema. It's for the Chazar Sashatz. Now, in later periods, these terms got confused, and you'll see them in both directions, used with expanded meanings in both ways, which is why if you open up an Art Scroll Siddur or some other Siddurim, you'll find it'll say Yotzros for the Arba Parshias, but in fact, they won't actually give you a single Yotzer Piyyut, a single Piyyut for the brachos Kriyas Shema. They'll just give you for Chazar Sashatz, they'll give you Krovos. They're using the term Yotzer in the meaning of a Krova, and we see, not so much in the 20th century, but we see in certain books in the 18th and 19th century in the other direction, they'll use the term Krova or Krovets to refer also to Piyyutim in the brachos of Kriyas Shema, but we need clarity here. So we're going to use the original meanings of the terms. Yotzers for the brachos of Kriyas Shema, Krova is for Chazar Sashatz. Now, the simplest form of a Krova is called a Shivata, a Shivasa. So it, from the Aramaic word Shvata, 7, it adorns each of the 7 brachos of the Amida equally. Each gets Paitanic representation, and in fact, originally this would have replaced most of the text of the brachos. The first bracha would begin, at least in the Eretz Yisraeli nosach of the bracha, Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu v'Yovaseinu, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, v'Elokei Yaakov, Elokei HaGadol, Gibor v'Norah, El Elyon, Konei Shamayim v'Aretz. Then you'd have the first Piyyut, and then immediately Baruch Ata Hashem, Magen Avraham. Then there'd be no text of the second bracha except the Piyyut. You'd have the Piyyut, and it would conclude Baruch Ata Hashem B'Chayim Eisim. And so for all 7 brachos of the Shabbos or Yom Tov Amida. We're not talking here about weekday Amidas. Those obviously would have far more, because there are far more brachos. We can talk about them elsewhere. So Shivata doesn't give preferential treatment to any of the brachos. And you find Shivatot, classically in Eretz Yisrael, they'd be generally either for Arvit, which is a bit surprising because generally there is no Chazar Sashatz in the evening, and it's not entirely clear what was going on then, whether they would have this special Chazar Sashatz only when there are Piyyutim. Certainly it was not during the week. At the very least, it was every Shabbos. So that's when you generally find them. Or, to some extent, for Musaf, usually very short ones, because it's the end of the service, and Paitanim didn't want to extended overly much. Very occasionally for mincha, though Shabbos and Yom Tov mincha is not generally a time for Piyyut. But when there was, if there were one for the mincha amida, it would be a shivata. When would there not be a shivata? For the shachar amida. Why is that? So, in ancient Eretz Yisrael, the time of apparently at the time of the Gemara and beyond until the time of the Gaonim, they did not say Qedushta on weekdays at all. On special weekdays, yes. On Chanukah, on Rosh Chodesh, fine. Chol Hamoed, if you want to call that a weekday. On Shabbos and Yom Tov, they did. They said Qedushta in Birchos Kriyas Shema, in the bracha of Yotzer, as we do today every day, and in the Shachar Amida, as again we do every day. They did not say it in Musaf at all, except on Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, and in some later periods, also on days when there was Talad Geshem, there was some expansion, and they did not say it in Mincha at all, except Yom Kippur. So, Qedushta would be once a week, or rather once in Yotzer, and once in Chazar Sashatz. This was an exciting event when the description of the divine throne room praising God, the Kadosh, 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 would be recited. And on such a day, there's great expansion in the third bracha, the bracha where the Qedushta is. Rather than an equal representation to each bracha with one piyut in it, there are lots of piyutim in the third bracha. So, in theory, it should look like this, right? I'll share the screen. In theory, it should look like this. We've got the first bracha, should have one piyut, and the second one piyut, and the third one, expanded for Qedushta, should have lots of piyutim, concluding with the Qedushta itself. You should have a little piyut before the end, and there should be a piyut in the next one, the next one, the next one, and the last one. And in fact, there are a few Qedushtaot like this, all based on the psukim of Shir HaShirim. So this led Ezra Fleischer, one of the great scholars of Piyyut in the 20th and very beginning of the 21st century, initially to conclude that this must have been the original structure of the Qedushta, and that only in later periods were all the piyutim after the Qedushta itself dropped, such that we're left with one piyut in the first bracha, one in the second, many in the third, and that's it. Later on, he reconsidered. He thought, if so, why is there no evidence of it except these few Qedushtaot, all based on Shir HaShirim? Perhaps the reason that those go on into the further brachot is simply because they want to fit in all of the psukim of the book of Shir HaShirim, and therefore they need more space. Why then, at this point, did he suggest that the Qedushta would stop at Qedushta? Because he says Qedushtaot were first made for holidays and only then for ordinary Sabbaths. And on the holidays, there's the special nusach, we say Ata v'chartanu. In Eretz Yisrael, there was a similar nusach, Ata v'charta. And if you would have piyutim every day of Yom Tov, in every bracha, you would never hear Ata v'charta. How can you never hear the special Yom Tov Tefillah? So therefore, they only wrote through the first three brachos. And once that was the structure for Yom Tov, when they started writing for Shabbos as well, they also would stop there. More recently, in this book, you can see the Festschrift for Yisrael Tashma, the memorial shrift, the Sefer Zikaron for Yisrael Tashma. Eden HaKohen wrote an article with another theory where he suggests that, in fact, the structure just going for the first three brachos is very, 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 very old. And it goes before the time when there was such a thing as the Amidah as a whole. It goes back to the time of the Mikdash, before Shimon HaPakoli created the structure of the Amidah that we know today. And all there was at the time, he says, were the first three brachos. Who knows? We don't know the reason for this, but all I can tell you is the facts on the ground. This is how the Qedushta looks. So what is the structure? Let's look here. The structure you'll find in the Qedushta is this. It'll begin with the beginning of the first bracha. Here I've given it to you in the ancient Eretz Israeli form, which is familiar from the Me'ein Sheva bracha on Friday nights, which is not the Chazaras Hashatz, but this was the Nusach in Chazaras Hashatz in general in Eretz Israel in roughly the first millennium of the Common Era. If you look at a Machzor today, it'll have the Babylonian form of the beginning of the bracha, which is our usual one. Smach nishtois. Doesn't make a big difference. Then you have the first Piyyut, which is called the Magain. Why is it called the Magain? Because the first bracha begins Magain Avraham. Now, if you look in a regular Machzor, okay, let's say this one, printed in Jitamir and Tafresh Ches, 1848. Typical. Let's look. Where are we? You see here, you can see they write Yotzer both for the Piyyut and Kriyas Shema, and they continue writing it for Chazaras Hashatz. They're just using Yotzer to mean Shacharis in general. But we're going to use technical terms. This is a krova, and specifically the kind of krova called a Qedushta. Look here, you've got the first bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem. You've got here this brief reshus, which is not part of the Qedushta, and we don't know its exact origin, but certainly in European machzorim from the time of manuscripts and print and through today, this line misod chachamim u'novonim u'milemed das mevinim. I am reciting these songs based on the counsel of the great sages. So it's an apology for inserting words of Piyyut into the Tefillah. In the time of the classical Paitanim, they needed no apology because Piyyut is Tefillah. Piyyut is the heart and soul of Tefillah. If you're going to say the same words every day, then there's no supplication in your Tefillah. However, later on, as things became more fixed, there was felt a need to apologize with this line. And anyway, here's the Magen. Now you'll look at the end of this first Piyyut, the way it's printed, this paragraph. You'll see afterwards there's this short other paragraph, only a few lines long, following immediately upon it, and then Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avraham. What's up with that? So if you look on my schematic chart, you'll see that Magen is not followed immediately by that little paragraph, that Piyyut Aleph Achat, Aleph 1, Aleph Eins. You'll see, but rather it's followed by Psukim. Where can you find this today? You'll find it in the Goldschmidt Machzorim, and you'll find it in some other Machzorim that are based thereupon. Let's look here in the Machzor Shivchei Yeshurun. This is the Krova for Parshas Para. What kind of Krova? As we said, a Qedushta. You've got the opening words, Baruch Atah, Misod Chachamim. We discussed this brief Rishus. Then you've got the Magain, Piyyut Aleph Magain. Says, gives you a little more information here. Al Seder Aleph Beis, because you see it's an alphabetical acrostic. Very, very, very common in the Magain. Not universal, but very close. And afterwards, look at the conclusion of it. Kismas chamuka b'chuka l'toras chashuka anechka kazos chuka kakasuv. It's the stain of the Jewish people is mechuka, is erased through it, through the ashes of the paraduma. L'toras chashuka, for purifying the one who is desired, the Jewish people. Nechkaka zos chuka, this chuka, this law is inscribed. It's an allusion to the first pasuk of the reading for Parshas Para. And indeed, when you look at the psukim, it says, it gives you that first pasuk. Then there are other pasukim which also relate to the Piyyut. I said I was wise, but it is distant from me. And indeed, you look at the Piyyut, this law of the paradoma, it's distant, it's difficult, etc. All of these psukim, they form the basis on which the Piyyut is constructed. Now, the last one you see ends with the word makomah. Now, that little paragraph at the end, which is called, the scholarship calls it by the Arabic name khuruj, exit, which is the name that it had in certain manuscripts in Arabic-speaking regions in the Middle Ages, in certain Arabic-speaking regions. If you've ever seen the signs in Israel and you can read Arabic, you'll see that dukhul and khuruj, entrance and exit signs and roads and other things. So khuruj is the exit. And you'll see that makomah, the word, and then the next word continues it. That's called anadiplosis, beginning a sentence with the same word that the previous sentence ended. In Hebrew, it's called shirshur, like sharsheret, the chain. So it's chained. Now this ultimately will end genunav ya'aleh. May he elevate those who are protected, those who are shielded by him, genunav, from the root lahagain. Baruch atah Hashem magain Avraham, shield of Abraham. So ultimately it weaves back into the bracha. It's not something distinct from the bracha. The Piyyut is woven directly into the bracha. This is very important when understanding Piyyut. We see the same thing in the second bracha. Second Piyyut is called a mechaya. Why is it called a mechaya? Not because, oh, it's so lovely, you were in such pain, and now it's such a mechaya to read this Piyyut. So that would be fun. And sometimes this, like any other Piyyut, really is a mechaya to read. That's not why it's called that. It's called that because the bracha ends mechaya meiseh, who resurrects the dead. Magen Avraham is called the Magen, Mechaya Mesim is called the Mechaya. Exact same structure where you've got the Piyyut, then you've got the Psukim, and then you've got the Khuruj, the little Piyyut, leading back into the conclusion of the bracha. These Psukim are not recited today, resulting in the strange situation where you have the Piyyut, the long Piyyut, and then immediately afterwards you have this very short Piyyut right afterwards. but in the Middle Ages they were certainly recited. Piyyut Chassid says in Sefer Hasidim, or whoever wrote that given paragraph of Sefer Hasidim, given that the textual history of Sefer Hasidim is incredibly complex. But let's say Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, he writes that he's very upset that people in his day, they would dwell on at length on the words of the Piyyut itself, and when they'd get the psukim, they would recite them very quickly. They would rush through them. He says this is bad. Psukim, which are divine words from the Bible, those you rush through, but Piyyutim, which are the words of humans, you dwell on. That was in the 13th century and late 12th, early 13th century. Today, he would have been horrified to see psukim we don't say at all. No, maybe one day they'll get restored. That would be great. I would support that. Anyway, the second bracha ends B'chayim Mason. Then the Mishalesh. So the way this comes out today is you'll look. We saw opening of the first bracha. We saw Chachamim, the Magen, no psukim, the Churuj, the conclusion of the bracha. Then the text, most of the text of the second bracha. Then the Machaya, no psukim, the Churuj, and the end of the bracha. In the third one, we don't start with the text of the bracha, because the text of the bracha that we say in Chazar Sashatz is the Qedusha. We're trying to get to the Qedusha. Qedusha is going to be the culmination, the climax of this whole Qedushta. So we head out straight into the third bracha. It's called the Mishalesh, some pronounce it Mishulash, the trebling or the treble, the third, the tripled. Why? Well, two reasons. One, it's the third bracha, but also it's the bracha where we're going to say Kadosh, 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 the threefold Kedusha. There are other names of this Piyyut, this component, in some manuscripts, such as Ashlamta, but we don't have to get into that now. How does this end? More psukim. And the last two psukim, generally, isn't true in all Geniza manuscripts, but in certainly in European manuscripts, the last two psukim are always Yimloch Adonai la'olam la'ech Tzion l'dor v'dor. Hallelujah. The Lord will reign forever, your God of Zion, for all generations. Praise the Lord. V'atakadosh yoshev tilos Israel, from Psalm 22, and you are wholly enthroned upon the praises of Israel. Almost seems as if you're going to go into Kedusha now. And perhaps at some point deep in antiquity, this was the end, before you had the expansions, and indeed you went into Kedusha. But no, we go into Piyyut 4. Piyyut 4, you'll see the structure of it. You look here, it's very often monorhyme. So you see every line, ka, 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 ka. Without discrete stanzas, it's just one long unit. And it ends, Chai v'kayam, nora'u marom v'kadosh, or in manuscript, some variant thereof. Addressing God directly, living and enduring one, awesome and lofty and holy. Generally said very loudly, this expression, this line, hence the expression, er schreit Chai v'kayam, he's shouting Chai v'kayam, for to scream very strongly at something. What's next? What's after this Piyyut Dalet, whose name is simply Piyyut Dalet, doesn't have a classical name, and in research it's called Piyyut Dalet. So Magen Machayim Mishalesh Piyyut Dalet. Then there's Piyyut Hey after Chai v'kayam. Can have one of a number of structures. You'll see here a structure you often find in the Piyyutim of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Kilir. Here you see it is in couplets, 2-line stanzas, some of which are further subdivided with each line with a break in the middle, such that you have the illusion of a 4-line stanza. But when you go further, you see here, this doesn't have a break in the middle, thus showing that all the stanzas aren't really 4 lines, they're really 2 lines. And here he's telling more in detail a specific midrash. It tends to be that in the first 3, There are allusions to Medrashim here and there, but he's not going through and beautifying. Lom Fayet. He's not beautifying a specific Midrash, but here he's telling a specific story. This is the story in Pirkei Blazer. In the Psikta. That when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to heaven, he heard God reciting the Mishnah in the name of Rabbi Lezer the Tana, and he said, if you're reciting laws, teachings in the name of a human, I want that human to be one of my descendants, and that's what happened. There is this stanza, L'olam Torah, L'olam Tukdash. This is a fixed piece of the Qedushta. This is not specifically from this one from Parshas Parah. It's not by Rabbi Elazar Bar Kalir. It's very old. We don't know exactly what it's doing there. Shulamit Elitzor has written a bit about this in her book on the Qedushta, which I can show you shelf. Let me not waste your time. I will find it next time. Anyway, but it is a passage in praise of God. It's sort of an interlude in the middle of the Qedushta. Then Piyyut Vav. Piyyut Vav also can have various structures. In Qedushta Ot by Rabbi Elazar Bar Kalir, it's often in the structure known as a kiklar. What is a kiklar? Well, what does circulare mean? To circulate. What goes here, you see, there is a refrain, and the refrain circulates between the stanzas. More of a lyrical poem with a refrain, and the refrain always ends kadosh. We're gearing towards the Kedusha. In later printings of Machzorim, you often see the refrains not there. It's only at the very beginning where the refrain is loudly proclaimed by the chas and repeated by the congregation at the beginning of the Piyyut, and then it does not appear later. However, in many instances, even as recently as the late 19th or even early 20th century, you do see in many Qedushta, they do have the refrain here. Good. What next? You see here, it says in Shimchei Shurun, there is an additional Piyyut, the Rahit Paraba Omen, written by Rabbi Elazar Bar Kalir, to be recited here in the Skrova, the exposition before the Siluk. It's included in the appendix. For whatever reason, in most Qedushta Ashkenazic communities in the early Middle Ages dropped the Rahitim, presumably to save time, but they are an integral part of the Qedushta. They're numbered Piyyut Zion, number 7. So let's just look here at the end of the book. They tend to be pattern poems. They're very structured. They can have all sorts of different structures, but like here you see, Ubechein, often introduced by a line with a v'chein quote from a pasuk or something, quote with a sentence. So may we elaborate on these words. And as you can look, shouldn't be a dagation that tav, whatever. That you should, you see, the Paitan elaborates on it by every stanza begins with the word para, and then the first line you've got the refrain adumat mima. Second line you've got asharin bahmum. In the middle, it's very, very patterned, very structured. You have it's like a mosaic of gems with the letters of the alphabet. Aleph, 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 base, 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 gimel, 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 and so through the end. Then you've got the final Piyyut of the Qedushta, which is this long Piyyut called a siluk. Siluk, conclusion. You can also think of it as going up. Siluk, going up, ascending to the Qedushta. Where were we? We were in Parshas Parah. But again, these skills are going to help you for every Qedushta you read. here we are. You've usually got some kind of introduction beginning v'chein in Ashkenazi manuscripts and printed editions. It will be v'chein l'chosa ala kedusha ki ata kadosh Yisrael u'Moshe. And so may the kedusha ascend to you because you are the Holy One of Israel and the rescuer of Israel. Then you have this long section, might be considered rhyming prose, although you see here there's a strict number of words here: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. In this section, often there are many sections within the Qedushta. Here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines beginning ein and with a rhyme fecha. Then you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 lines. They all end in the rhyme mos, and then the ros, and then the Paitan really has freedom to do what he wants. He can really elaborate. The section's long, and he can go through all the midrashim that he alluded to earlier, and he can he can detail them in ways that are often very easy to understand in comparison to the previous sections. And he has to get to the Kedusha. So how does he do that? Well, let's look at this one for Para. Here he says that one of the components used to for the ashes of the Paraduma is the Eitz Erez. And the two of them are the Eitz Erez and the Izov, the cedar wood and the Hyssop. Cedar wood's a very big tree. Hyssop is a little plant. So why is this? Here's the Midrash. Because if you're haughty like a cedar, you've got to make yourself meek like the hyssop. And then he talks about haughtiness and meek. So what is the most haughty? God is the only one who can truly be ga'ah. Could be haughty, lofty upon lofty. And he's lofty above all, above the ox, among the domestic mammals, and the lion among the wild mammals, and the nesher, let's say eagle. Let's say there is some, let us say, discussion about the definition of nesher in different places. The eagle among the birds, and the erez, the cedar among the trees, and humans among all of them. But God, the king, is lofty above all of them. And these, the ox, the lion, the nesher, and the human are inscribed in God's throne. There's a throne above, there's a throne below. There's a temple, mikdash, mikdash, mizbech, mizbech, banim, banim, malachim, malachim. Just everything there's below, there is above. There's the heavenly temple, the heavenly throne room, where the angels are singing Kedusha, Makdishimu, Makdishim. Up there, they're saying Kadosh, just as down here we're saying Kadosh. Kedusha, Kadosh, Mishalashim. They are reciting 3 times Kedusha to the Holy One. Kakosuva Yad Nevi'echa, V'karaz Zev Yamar, and you're in Kedusha, and the Kedushta ends. Are there Kedushtaot that continue in Kedusha, and have pieces within Kedusha? Yes. And indeed, in classical times, this seems to have been the structure. But today, you see such things mostly just on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. On all other occasions, you're looking at a Qedushta. It's going to end at that moment. Now you're in Kedusha. Good. With this, you should understand the structure of a Qedushta, and you can apply it to any Qedushta. Will sometimes certain components be missing? Yes, but this will give you the general structure that you can understand.